I think we should talk about student self-sabotage, what goes on in the minds of students when they do it, and how maybe, as teachers, we can sometimes unintentionally enable it through the design and implementation of our assessments. I'm Nick, a psychology teacher of 11 years and host of the Psych Boost YouTube channel. I'll refer to my experience teaching psychology in this video, but really, I think what I have to say applies to any subject. This is an extension of a talk I gave to AQA at their annual Psychology Teachers Conference, which I fully recommend if you missed it this year. And there's also a student version of this video that I hope you'll show in your own classrooms. In this video, I'm going to be focusing mostly on assessment, but in the student video, I'm going to focus a little more on the unequal starting position students find themselves in when they first start their A-level. This will include the reality of what it actually takes to catch up to peers, and how they should be taking assessment seriously as part of that journey. That's going to be a frank and honest conversation about desirable difficulties and how the shortcuts students take often hold them back from actual long-term progress. I'll also talk about self-handicapping, cognitive dissonance, and the difference between intrinsic and extrinsic motivation, hopefully in a way students can relate to. For a disengaged student, it can be a difficult conversation to have, but I think there's a reason why I'm able to deliver that message. I struggled massively in my A-levels. I actually failed my AS. I did somehow get into uni and study psychology and philosophy. Then I struggled some more, having to retake the second year, but I did eventually figure it out. I turned it around and completed 2 dissertations in my final year, and got the second best score in psychology out of 120 students, and the best of my year in my philosophy dissertation. For the full story of my redemption arc, you'll have to watch my student video. Now, while the student video is likely a little bit more for the able but disengaged, this video may help you more for students you see performing well during the year, but falling short at the final exams. I think our first step is understanding how far removed classroom assessments are from real exam results. Let's get some visual context with psychology A-levels as an example. I've chosen 2025, but each year is very similar. This is the breakdown of scores that it takes to get each grade, from the 288 marks available from all the papers. You can see from this that the A star was 222, so 77%. In psychology, we often obsess maybe a little too much over the big 16-mark essays, but they actually are a useful way of judging the student's overall abilities. Now, what's really interesting is 77% out of 16 is just 12.3, so around a 12 out of 16 on an essay. Get that kind of score consistently across long and short questions, and that's where it takes to get an A star. Now, let's look at the reality of how many students actually achieved that in 2025. So got at least 77% of the marks or more across the papers. It's less than 6%. If you're anything like me, many, maybe most of your students are consistently getting 12 or more in a class test, but not all of them are going on to get A stars in the real exam. Okay, so you're likely thinking, well, it's obvious, Nick, class exams and real exams are not comparable. And you'd be right to think that. And we need to communicate that clearly to students so they don't misunderstand their current level of ability. This isn't about causing extra anxiety, but we're training students for what is effectively a competition. If we were training them for a race, we wouldn't use a faulty stopwatch or misrepresent what it said. So of course, we need to communicate that end of topic class tests only cover what's just been taught, so it's fresh, and it's got far less content to revise. But there is more going on. The physical and mental experience of a class test is just fundamentally different to a real exam, and the ability of students to take advantage of that to appear like they're performing better than they are is massive. So one of my big issues is if classroom assessments as they're currently designed are not equivalent to final exams in form or function, we need to be clear about what high or low scores mean. Because just giving grades for class tests rewards one thing: perceived performance on that test, not real ability, and that has a massive unintended effect. So this gets me to my thoughts on why students self-sabotage, and by that I mean the reason students act in a way that make them appear on the surface to appear to do well, but ultimately act in ways that undermine their long-term interests and final exam performance. Let's put ourselves in the mind of a student. They want certain things. They do want good grades, but why they want good grades is a little nebulous. For the final exams, they want a ticket to their uni of choice, but that maybe felt more of a cause of background anxiety than a current motivation to revise. But in the short term, well, they want to show off in front of their peers. They want to tell their parents they got a good grade. And they want to impress you. And they want to reduce that nagging sense of self-doubt. Now, to get those good grades, they could be hardworking, conscientious students recapping by revising little and often, spending the 2 years working to feedback. But the reality is the majority of your students have a lot of other things competing for their attention that, quite frankly, are a lot more interesting and immediate than the A level. Unfortunately, students discover that actually there are other ways to get a short-term sugar high in a class test, even if that's at the expense of long-term performance. I'm going to define all of this under the umbrella of cheating, but not all students and maybe not all teachers would see it this way. But if we define assessment fundamentally as a demonstration of actual knowledge and understanding of a subject as a whole, even though only part of it's assessed, I'm going to include any way to get around that as cheating. Now, I'm sure you have your own experiences of seeing students cheat, and it's useful to talk to students about that. Just them knowing you're aware cheating's going on can make a difference. So I've had weird cheating. Once a student started writing and I looked across and his hands were blue. I looked closer and he had notes in tiny writing in blue biro all over his hands. How he didn't think I would notice, I don't know. But when I asked him about it, he said he'd run out of post-it notes when revising. So after that, we all had to do jazz hands before every class test. Now, more common is accidentally leaving notes open on the floor or an empty seat out of eyeline of the teacher, or having a phone on their knee. I once caught a student with a phone on their knee, and I could see where they were literally in the process of Googling the essay title. I don't know if I was more disappointed that they hadn't bothered to prepare notes to cheat from than the actual cheating itself, but oh well. But I think the two most common ways of cheating are absolutely endemic. One is a quick glance across and looking at the student's work next to them. Even if they just see enough to pick up the key terms they didn't actually remember, that's something that they'll get credit for when in reality they didn't know them. And the other way is finding out from the class before what the high scoring questions are on, and then wildly cramming that in the minutes before arriving at a class test. However it's done, if your class assessments are flawed and your students are motivated to cheat, then you're going to get a consistent picture of your students that just isn't in line with their actual abilities. Maybe they then get caught out with a bad mock that's actually done under exam conditions. But if they say that's just a one-off, that maybe they were nervous or they didn't revise properly this time, you might believe them. Then maybe they look like they improve in a future class test. Then you might not worry, only finding out on results day that your idea of them was way out of line. So what do we do? Let's deal with each of these in turn. We can start by just telling the students you're aware some students leave notes out and you'll be looking. Also ask them explicitly at the start to show you that their phone is in their bags. Even if they don't cheat, role-playing the experience of the exam hall is no bad thing. It's a pain, but putting the tables and exam setup will help build that atmosphere and should help with students glancing at other students' work, but reorganizing the layout is just not always possible. Now, if you're like me, when your students have assessments, you have your own work to do. Maybe it's marking the previous group's tests, so you're not constantly on the lookout. But at the start of this year, I sat in the middle of the room and put 3 pieces of paper in front of me. One in the center, one to the left, and one to the right. I then took it in turn to look at each piece of paper without moving my head and asked the students which paper I was looking at. I even turned my head to the right and looked at the left piece of paper. Every time the students could tell which paper I was looking at. So I said to them, when I'm marking, I'll look up occasionally. And if I see you looking at someone else's work, I may not actually say anything because I don't want to embarrass you or put others off their test, but in my mind, there will always be a question mark over your honesty, your work, and your abilities. So to avoid that, keep your eyes focused on your own paper. When it comes to classes sharing information, it is a tricky one. I did an end of topic test this year and told my free classes I knew they shared the questions, and I didn't want them to for the next test, and gave them fair warning that some or all of the questions could be different. So I did the test as normal with the first group, the second group came in, and as usual, I gave them a little time to revise. I walked around and noticed something very interesting. Every one of them was revising topics from the unit that were not the essay title from the previous group. Handed the paper out, and it's exactly the same test as the previous group. So as you can imagine, there were some quiet groans. Group 3 comes in, and I've clearly the words got around that actually it's the same test, I'm not rotating questions at all. So in revision time, almost all the students just so happen to have their handbooks open at the exact page that covers the essay. I hand the papers out, and it's a new paper with totally different essay. Again, lots of quiet groans. I asked the students, why do you do it? And to be fair to them, maybe they're not trying to find out, but if you overhear other students talking about the essay that was in the test, or you know the teachers use the same papers every year and the upper 6 students shared theirs with you, you'd feel daft revising anything else. And if you know you're not the first group to do a test, but you can definitely find out what was on it, then why would you spend your entire weekend revising the whole topic? Interestingly, it was pretty hard to get the information out of my own students. Even after we did that test, They want you to believe that they don't cheat. I want you to keep that in mind. Most of your students want to impress you. And I can understand why when they worry about UCAS predictions and reports home. But interestingly, I started tutoring this year, and multiple tutees have just freely told me they're not worried about an upcoming test because they can find out the essay questions from the previous group, or even that the teacher has heavily hinted at the essay and they want to review that. Now, my actual solution is pretty extreme, and I know many of you won't agree, but I want to tell you what it is and then deal with the main criticism. So at the end of a topic, you tell your students it's time for an end of topic test. Say to the students, here are the essay titles from each section. Let's say there are 6 of them. They cover the entire topic and they are numbered. And then tell them, when we sit the paper, I'm going to roll an online dice right in front of you. And no matter what it is, you're all going to write that essay. If you want to avoid the peaking issue, then alternately assign the students A and B and both sit different essays based on the dice rolls. Now, the primary criticism I hear from other teachers is this means we're not judging or comparing the students equally. But my argument is, why do we even need to compare them to each other at this stage? Is that comparison not just feeding into the pressure to artificially inflate grades? Surely, if we're running these assessments for students to improve, the point is simply for that individual student to find out some ways in which they're falling short and can build their skills. And are we actually deluding ourselves if we think we're comparing fairly if one group of students had to do the revision because they had the test first, and other groups knew they would find out the main questions with enough time to tip the scales? Anyway, that's my suggestion. If the students say they hate it, then you should ask them why. Surely from their perspective, it makes no difference. Keep in mind, the reason students may say they don't like it is because it makes it much harder to cheat. By the way, the alternate A-B arrangement with 2 questions is how I like to do whiteboard quizzes. Some individuals' performance dropped significantly the day I started doing that, simply because the answers couldn't travel around the room. Now, that wasn't a bad thing. I was finally getting some real understanding of where the students were actually at. Now, these are some difficult messages and strategies. And if we put in the changes and don't bring the students with us, we can just frustrate them. If we tell the students not to cheat without removing the incentives, or at least justifying our reasoning, it can just come across as a lecture. Most students think cheating the system is a bit of a joke, thinking they've won if they can get a high score without actually putting in the work, but not realizing they're robbing themselves of the chance of some real revision and feedback. So I feel the best way is to communicate why we're making things harder for them through metaphors and stories. I'll briefly summarize some of the ones I use here, but again, watch the student version to hear them fully explained. If you have some good ones, pop them in the comments for other teachers to read and probably steal. One is talking about the entire A level as like a race, but making clear they're not all starting at the same starting positions. Some students have through the years developed skills like expressing themselves well in writing, building a wide vocabulary, and quite frankly, developing a love for learning and understanding new information, not just seeing a subject as a set of facts to be temporarily memorized to pass a test. Those students are going to carry on developing at a faster rate. So I say to my students, if that's not you, you're going to find it hard to catch them unless you fundamentally change your approach to revision and learning throughout your course. It doesn't matter if you cram before your exams. And you need to know, like a sprint at the end of a race, everybody is revising intensely in the days running up to the exams. Cramming only stops you from falling further behind. I know this because my viewing figures look like this every year. I average just over 8,000 views a day, but I can peak as high as 180,000 on the day before an exam. Because performance is skill-based, not just rote memorization, it means there are students who are not currently capable of getting an A or an A star. And we should be honest about that. Many students who are not currently capable could be, but they're not now because they haven't been doing the training required to perform at that level. Right now, I may not be physically capable of running 5K in 30 minutes, no matter how hard I try. I may become that person, but it'll take time to work on myself. I honestly think it's worth showing this graphic to students. We don't want to discourage them, but I don't think it helps to not be honest about what it takes. But that needs to go with a guide to get to the top if that's what they want. The same way we'd be honest but supportive if we were training athletes who want to be elite. If after that conversation students accept they're behind and want to catch up, they're going to have to go through a process of self-reflection and consider how they're going to actually develop skills. Which leads me on to another metaphor. This is about seeking out difficult but effective methods. So many students revise or try and learn in ways that are surface level. They'll rewrite notes, skim handbooks, or even passively watch my videos. This may give a nice sense of, ooh, I remember this. the reassuring feeling of recognition memory. But because the recall is not active, like it needs to be in the exam, the student does not feel the discomfort of trying to remember something and failing, looking it up, testing at a later date, failing again, and then going through that cycle until they recall information without assistance. The metaphor I use for this is the gym. Now, if you go to the gym and all you do for the hour is look at your phone and talk to your friends, you can't really complain that you're not getting stronger. When it comes to the gym, if you want results, you need to push your body in a way that is uncomfortable. It's no good saying, oh, I spent hours revising, if you just revised in a way that felt nice. It didn't make you feel mentally uncomfortable. So fundamentally, that time was not effective. I'm also planning another video soon on effective revision that you might want to show your students, so they can't claim they haven't been taught how to revise. And my final point, I only heard this recently, but honestly it blew my mind of how obviously true it is, but how counterintuitive it sounds. This point is by the marketing expert Rory Sutherland, but I'm going to paraphrase it. Every essay you ever write at A-level or degree is absolutely useless as an essay. The world does not need another A-level standard or even undergraduate standard essay on, say, the working memory model. Chances are the only two people who will ever read it are you and the person marking it. The essay itself is not the point of writing the essay. The point is to develop you into being the type of person who can write an essay at that standard, remembering, understanding, and synthesizing a range of information to progressively higher standards. So one day you can write something that actually does make a difference. I take from that the point, every time you need to write for a qualification, you need to ask yourself, am I doing the things that I need to do to make me a better writer? If I'm just trying to remember things I don't actually understand for 10 minutes to print them on a page and then forget, the answer is no. And ultimately both the student's writing time and the teacher's marking time is wasted. Okay, that's enough about student self-sabotage. It's time to turn the mirror to ourselves. I've spoken about student delusions, but as teachers, we have to be real about something. I think to a certain level, we allow our students to delude us about their abilities because honestly, I think if we realize the full extent of their lack of knowledge and understanding, it would be difficult for us to accept. Maybe we worry if a group of students perform poorly in a class test, it would make us look bad in front of the students. Maybe you'd be worried about the parents and maybe other teachers or heads of department. There may even be, subconsciously, a temptation to set an easy test. Maybe hint at the questions, turn a blind eye to some low-level cheating, and mark generously. I'll be honest, I've often felt that temptation consciously and have to fight against it. But we do have to fight against it because these are advantages students simply won't have in the real exam. We can justify it by saying, well, maybe we're helping them with their anxiety or building their confidence by giving them an early win. And I don't see those things as bad things, but we should be clear to the students about that in your design of assessments. Use open book tests, low stakes cooperative quizzes. They're fine. Maybe don't show students difficult exam style tests until they're actually ready for it. But when we're giving feedback on performance on assessments, we owe it to the students to make clear what that actually shows and also what it doesn't. Ultimately, this gives them the chance to learn from their failures. And if you'd like to hear more about that, then watch my conversation with BPS Teacher of the Year and host of Psychology in the Classroom, Lucinda Powell. I hope that helped. And as I finish, I want to thank all my teacher and student patrons who, with their support, help me teach part-time so I can make the free-to-watch Psych Boost course on YouTube. If you'd like to join them, head over to patreon.com/PsychBoost. Goodbye.